Hi everyone, welcome to our Tech Talk of Travel Planner by Genevieve Chin, Grace Wang, and Spencer Cowan, and mentored by Saharsh Yaruva. So the problem our project is trying to address is that sometimes we make travel plans for dates that are far into the future, like a couple months or maybe a year. And so oftentimes our typical weather channels and weather apps don't really provide us with weather data that far in advance. So this causes us to be unsure of, what to pack and what the weather is like. So to address that problem, we used a weather API called Meteostat, and this API provided us with historical weather data. And so we used 5 years of historical weather data and averaged it to estimate predicted weather. And then we used this predicted weather data to create a packing list.
Our team consisted of Genevieve Chin, who is responsible for the front end and the user interface, Grace Wang, who is responsible for the back end as well as the back end and front end integration, and Spencer Cowan, who is responsible for the back end as well as the back end and front end integration.
Our project's architecture starts out at the home page of the website, where we collect the user input such as the destination and dates of their travel plans. We then send this information to our JavaScript function, where we first call our API to find the weather station that is close to the destination. And with that ID, we are then able to collect the weather data from our API. We then average this data, and our function determines appropriate clothing items based on the conditions. This information is then displayed on our results page. To display the information for the selected dates and location, we had to be able to send the user input from our homepage to our results page. To do this, we stored the user input inside the URL link to the results page as a query string, and the user input is then extracted from the URL in the JavaScript file.
Yeah, so once users input all of their information, they're taken to this web page, which is the results page, and it has a column with the weather data and then another column with the items that they should pack. So this page is backed by our results.html file, and so in our HTML file we have a portion that's script, and basically what it does is that it changes the content displayed on our web page, because depending on what location and what date our users are traveling, the items displayed will be different. So over here we're just using document object model to change that output. And so to get the data and items to pack, we have to access functions in our index.js file. So in this case, we are changing what's displayed for our weather data, and then we call the function getWeatherData. So if we look at our index.js file with our getWeatherData function, our function takes in the parameters destination, year, start date, end date. So these are all things that were passed in from our user input from the home page. So once we have that, our getWeatherData function calls on the function getStationID. So getStationID basically takes in a destination and outputs a list of station IDs, weather station IDs for that location. So once we have our station IDs, we can access our weather API. So like our API doesn't take in a city name as a input for our query. We have to use a weather station ID, so it knows what destination we're looking for. So once we have that, our code just puts our individual data into its individual array. So all of the temperature data goes into our average temperature array. etc. So in our code, we have a for loop that goes from 2019 to 2015, and so we're just accessing the data from multiple years. And later on in our get weather data function, we also have code that calculates the averages of our weather data. So in this example, it's calculating the average temperature, and it's doing this by accessing our temperature array, which we created here with all the average temperatures, and it's just averaging all of those average temperatures and storing it into a variable called average temp. So we do this for precipitation, snow, and sun, and we store all of the averages into an array called raverage, and then our getWeatherData function returns raverage. So on our results page, we also have a column that displays the items that users should pack. So again, this varies based on what location and what date users are traveling. So we also needed to find a way to change the content of that depending on the parameters. So over here we have a function packing results, which does just that. So in this function, we call the get packing list function, which is also in our index.js file. And so if we take a look here in our index.js file, our get packing list function basically has an array with all the average weather data that we got from our get weather data function, and then it accesses the items in our array. So our average temperature is the first item in our array, so it accesses that, and then based on that, it determines what users should pack. So basically in our get packing list function, we have a lot of conditionals that determine what items to add to the list of items to pack. So in this case, our stuff is our array of all of the stuff that users should pack. And so this function returns stuff. And if we look at our results.html page, we're just accessing stuff, and then we are looping through and adding it to our web page.
So in addition to letting the user know what they should pack based off the various weather factors, we also added JavaScript so that based off the weather factors, the weather icon that shows up on the user interface would change to represent that weather. So for example, if the amount of snow was greater or equal to 10, then we would have the function change the image source to a snowman.
The development and deploy process began with sketching out ideas for how the site would look and what features we wanted to include. We then had to find an API so that we could get the weather predictions. With the data available from the API, we then discussed what should be presented to the user and how we would present that information. We then split our teams so that one of us could focus on designing the HTML pages and two of us could work on the JavaScript. As we worked on putting it all together, we met regularly to discuss what we were doing so that everything could be put together nicely. Once we finished, we implemented the JavaScript into our HTML, and from there, it was just a matter of testing, debugging, and deploying.
So some lessons that we learned during this experience was coding in a group, using GitHub for version control, and using APIs. For further work, we'd like to add a feature that lets users input what they plan to do during their trip and provide a packing list that takes that into account. Thank you for listening to our Tech Talk, and if you have any further questions, here is the team contact information.